As we approach a new edition coming in June 2026, I thought it was a good time to lay out some thoughts about how 10th edition has gone for me, and specifically focus on the part I've been enjoying the most, which is Combat Patrol. I'm going to break this video down into 4 sections and discuss each one, so if you want to skip to these specific parts, check the timestamps in the description. 2023, the Leviathan box was released, marking the start of a brand new edition of Warhammer 40k. Back then, although only 3 years ago, there was a lot of hype and talk surrounding 40k. Space Marine 2 was seemingly on the edge of releasing. A Warhammer Fest opening event was held in Manchester a month before that I was actually very lucky to have attended, but what I want to focus on today was the changes to the rule set. In 10th edition, we saw many changes to simplify things, such as streamlining datasheets to make them more readable for new players, the reintroduction of universal special rules, and a welcomed reduction of the stratagem bloat that plagued 8th and 9th edition. Overall, although not as dramatic as the change from 7th to 8th, 10th was a big shake-up. All codexes from previous editions were dropped, and a set of free-to-download and access index rules were uploaded to the Warhammer app, so we could get started playing the new edition as soon as possible with no paywall. Of course, as the edition got going, codexes gradually crept back in, which once again reopened the gaping hole in our wallets. It was so great to open up the app, which to all GW's credit is a pretty good app, and see all the content you were reading the day before the codex release is now locked and unable to be seen. In terms of rules, 10th edition mainly reorganized where you went to find the information for your models, and only really introduced a small number of genuine core rule changes. GW rearranged the Warhammer filing cabinet, putting new labels on shit. For example, relabeling things to Sustained Hits, Feel No Pain, Deadly Demise. These were added to serve as universal abilities instead of faction/datasheet specific ones. This had the benefits of streamlining the rule sets, so it's easier for players to communicate to each other what their shit does, and makes the data cards a little more compact and easier on the eyes. But it was at the cost of removing some of the lore and the fluffiness of each faction. Literally going from an ability called Death to the False Emperor to having it named as Sustained Hits is quite the downgrade if you ask me. Also, things like ballistic skill and weapon skill were moved down into the stats for the actual weapons, so when shooting or fighting, you could just follow each stat in chronological order, making it easier for newbies. Then, some examples of the few genuinely new mechanics were new detachment organization, OC objective control stats and rules for determining who takes what objective, and things like Battle Shock. Battle Shock was a replacement for the morale system, which instead of your boys literally being taken off the board and dying because they pissed their pants so hard, became losing objective control and the ability to play stratagems. Some other smaller new mechanics were also added, such as completely new universal abilities like Devastating Wounds, which bypasses the armor save usually on a roll of a 6, and the Hazardous ability on weapons, a reinterpretation of the old Gets Hot rule, which on the roll of a 1 inflicts 3 mortal wounds on character models. In other words, Diddle Bad Rat can finally stop killing himself in turn 1. So overall, 10th edition saw a reordering and a few core rule changes to make the game slightly more playable and easier to get into from a new player perspective. If you're talking about new players, you can't not mention the starter set. Like all the editions since 8th edition, there have been 3 different varieties: the introductory set, starter set, and ultimate starter set, of which I believe now was renamed to the Combat Patrol starter set. It's this latter starter set that I will be discussing about today because I genuinely think it is the best starter set to be released by GW. The contents contains 2 fully fledged armies, a mini rulebook and handbook, 2 boards, and enough terrain to actually start playing a real mini-sized game of Warhammer 40k called Combat Patrol. Combat Patrol actually had its origins in 8th edition, when people would play smaller 500-point games using a patrol detachment. But in 10th, a more robust and slightly separate version of the game was made for easier entry into the hobby. Combat Patrol in 9th edition only saw 3 missions, Outriders, Encircle, and Incisive Attack, that you could play in a small 500-point game. But now in 10th edition, there are 6 missions. The basic, easy to understand Clash of Patrols mission, where your warlords can extract data from objectives. Archaeotech Recovery, that involves decaying objectives at random. Forward Outpost, a map played on the long side of the board with spread out objectives. Scorched Earth, perhaps my favourite of them all, a classic objective burning mission that has been a staple in 40k in some shape or form. Sweeping Raid, another longer style map involving disrupting your opponent's supply lines. And finally, Display of Might, which sees your warlords fight to claim sacred sites. Although all 6 of these missions are contained inside the rulebook you get, it isn't essential to have, as all these mission rules and the core rules themselves are available for free online. White Dwarf also actually released a few extra missions, including a weird 3-player mode that I thought was quite interesting. Just a fun fact. Not only does the starter set contain this handy rulebook, but it also contains 2 combat patrols to use. The first combat patrol is the Space Marine Combat Patrol, Strike Force Octavius, including a Space Marine Captain in Terminator armor, a Librarian in Terminator armor, a 5-man Infernus Marine squad, and a 5-man Terminator squad. If you're wondering, I've swapped out some of the original models in my painted up version just to drip it out a bit more in the Blood Angel theme. The Tyranid half, the Vardengar Swarm, is led by a Tyranid Prime, 2 squads of 10 Termagaunts, 3 Von Ryan Leapers, 5 Barb Gaunts, and a very cool looking Psychophage. You also get 2 additional Ripper Swarms with the Gaunts too, but these are not included in the actual combat patrol list. The model count seems very appropriate to me and reflects the different playstyles of both the Space Marines and the Tyranids. After playing more than 10 to 15 games using this starter set, I can tell you that it's quite balanced if you know what you're doing. The Tyranid side has the weaker damage output, but has CP-induced Termagaunt respawning. The model count is big and can be used to deadly effect for early board control and capturing objectives. The Space Marine side is stronger in terms of raw firepower, but it lacks in numbers, making it harder to hold objectives. With 2 very different playstyled combat patrols and 6 missions, it's hard for it to get repetitive, and honestly, you can really have a lot of fun just playing with the contents out of the starter box. So I've already discussed and outlined some of the combat patrol rules, but often the upsides of combat patrol get lost when people seem to focus on combat patrols as purely a means to start building and painting a standard 2000 point army meant to be played on a board 2 times the size and 4 times, if not more, the price. It goes without saying, making a 2000 point army is no easy feat, and only really becomes a realistic option once you've spent at least a few years getting into the hobby, slowly accumulating a collection of miniatures. Playing a 2000 point game, in my opinion, should not be the standard for a variety of reasons, such as 1. It costs a lot of money. No shit, really. It gives 40k the impression it's harder to get into than it actually is. It requires literally months of painting and dedicated time beforehand to start playing, and it also has an overly competitive focus involving constant FAQ checks and meta changes. Honestly, to me, it's a clusterfuck and not the intended Warhammer 40k experience. And yes, I know combat patrols are still also talked about in forming 1000 point starter armies, but my point still stands, albeit at half strength, but not enough to cause battle shock though. What people miss about buying combat patrol boxes is that they also exist for actually playing the combat patrol smaller game mode. And for me, I think this should be the main reason to pick up a box. However, now I will just acknowledge a few criticisms that people give as to why you should just play standard 40k, i.e. 1000 and 2000 points instead. The 4 main criticisms being: 1, data sheets are different, so you need to relearn the rules again. 2, you don't have control over army composition, you need to use what is specified in the combat patrol itself. 3, combat patrols are obviously unbalanced. And okay, this isn't actually a reason, but 4, the Space Marine Combat Patrol, Strike Force Octavius, is shit. I'm going to address all 4 of these points. Although all partly true, they don't actually hold up. First, the datasheets are different, but only slightly. The stat lines are practically the same, the only differences being the addition or removal of certain special rules native to the standard 40k datasheet. For example, if you take the Space Marine Combat Patrol, if you look at the difference between the Librarian datasheets from the Combat Patrol one to the real one, the only difference is like 1 ability, Psychic Hood, that's been removed from the Combat Patrol datasheet. Likewise, the same is true of the Terminator squad here. The only thing that's been removed is just the Teleport Homer ability. Everything else is basically the same. Also, the core rules are literally the exact same. Everything about them is the exact same, there's no changes. The one part that is annoying about the datasheet though is that you only get pre-selected weapons. You can't choose between a bunch of weapons that you would get if you were playing standard 40k. And the other difference is the detachment rules. You can choose only between 2 enhancements and 2 secondary objectives, and you only get 3 detachment specific stratagems in each combat patrol. But honestly, to me, this is a very good thing. That's less stratagem and rule bloat to think about. Secondly, you do actually have control over army composition, although I will concede it is less than a standard 40k game. Every faction has 2 to 8 different combat patrols, excluding knights, which only have 1, but they still actually have 1, which is good. Some of these combat patrols were featured in some White Dwarf issues, and GW has continued supporting the combat patrols released in 9th edition, providing them with 10th edition rules. Take Tyranids for example. It contains 3 different combat patrols you can actually use: the Vardengar Swarm from the starter set, the current standard 10th edition combat patrol, the Tyranid Assault Brood, and a White Dwarf released Insidious Infiltrators that consists of a bunch of Von Ryan Leapers and Lictors. So you can pick from these different lists if you want to play differently with different models but play the same faction. And good news for Space Marine players, you literally have 15 combat patrols you can choose to play. 15! Some are under Blood Angels, Dark Angels, etc., but as you're free to paint Space Marines however you want, you can essentially pick out and play the combat patrol with the most interesting unit composition and army rules. Third, it's obviously unbalanced. Well, I hate to break it to you folks, so is standard 40k. If you pick narrative-focused armies, you will lose, the meta is constantly changing, some models are just going to play better than others, and it will remain like this forever. It doesn't matter about balance updates, doesn't matter about tournament stats, it will still be unbalanced. It's a dice game that has way too many moving parts for it to be made fair in practicality. And if anything, for argument's sake, because the rules in Combat Patrol are slightly simpler and smaller, it's probably more likely that it has the potential to actually be more balanced than standard 40k anyway. Now there are obviously some combat patrols that are OP as fuck, cough cough Salamanders, Pyroclasm Assault Force, cough cough. Pyroclasm sounds really fucking weird, doesn't it? But this is a big point to stress, because the rules are free and openly available to everyone, you're able to study up on all the rules for all the combat patrols on the Warhammer app without a paywall and see them for yourself. So if you really did want to get serious, you could study up on the other factions without needing to spend the $60 on a codex each time to do so. And finally, a lot of people say the Space Marine Combat Patrol is dog shit. Well yes, buying a brand new Space Marine Combat Patrol from the GW website is extremely overpriced, and actually in Japan it's more expensive than literally buying the starter set with it in plus a whole other army and terrain for some reason. But for using it as a starter army to play Combat Patrol specifically, it is really, really good. You can find these models on eBay for cheap, and you can use second-hand old Terminator models, old Librarian and Captain Terminator armor models. These are dirt cheap from second-hand websites like the Troll Trader in the UK. So bringing it all together, I think Combat Patrols should be bought to be played in Combat Patrol games, not as a means to spend absurd amount of money on a big army to play in standard 40k. Combat Patrol is a fun and smaller sized game that is way more accessible for beginners because it's way cheaper and more straightforward. Buy the box, paint the models, play the game. All the rules for it are free, the datasheets and rules are basically the same as standard size 40k. You still do actually get some control over army composition, especially if you play Space Marines. Combat Patrols being unbalanced is not a valid reason to dismiss it, as I've already explained, and if you buy strategically, I'd argue the standard Space Marine Combat Patrol is actually the best and cheapest way to get into starting Warhammer if you're smart about it. That's my rant over. If we look into what's to come in 11th edition, things like objective markers ditched for terrain footprints, adding a keyword for support characters, picking targets after a charge roll, keeping previously released codexes compatible going into it, these are all examples of small, minor tweaks that are shaping up 11th edition to be a soft reset, similar to the difference between 8th and 9th edition. As it's a soft reset, I expect much will really not change, but there are some things that I hope will happen. First, I hope that GW still keeps support for the previously released 9th and 10th edition combat patrols. I'm not expecting this to happen with all of them, to be honest, but as I have invested time and effort into painting up a bunch of them this year, I'd hope that the ones I've got are still playable. Second, I hope more support is given to Combat Patrol, whether that be by adding more missions, other faction choices, or keeping the new stuff free like the rest and not behind a pesky paywall. And finally, this is generally speaking, I hope that GW will be successful with making 11th edition more innately narrative focused. The objective markers to terrain footprint switch alongside releasing a campaign card deck and a lore book inside the upcoming Armageddon launch box, like obvious intentional moves to re-inject the narrative aspect back into the game. But honestly, I can't help but worry that even with all of these well-intended changes, the already well-established ecosystem of competitive play, esports adjacent 2000 point nature of 40k that came to define 10th edition will unfortunately remain the same. Either way, I'm looking forward to the new edition, and the attempt to add back that narrative flavour is a move in the right direction to me. Perhaps GW is finally prioritizing having a good time over looking for the perfect balanced game. Because after all of this, it's pretty clear that that was never the point of the game in the first place. Just play Combat Patrol, guys.